This year we gained, last year, 2019, we gained the matching funds from the government in order to fund and give grants to our teams. And we have a lot of pro bono services that help us throughout the year to execute our activities. So that's all for me. Thank you. And I wanted to say just a few words about Mrs. Karen Gomer. She's the innovation manager of the MIT Deshpante Center for Technology Innovation. The Deshpante Center is the center that does the exact same work that Cyprus is doing. They help the commercialization of academic research. And Mrs. Gomer has over 30 years of experience in the industry, and she has worked for 5 years with startups, and the last 4 years she's at the MIT and the Deshpante Center, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I think she's gonna talk more about herself and MIT Deshpante Center for you. So
Please welcome
Karen.
Hold on just a second.
Yeah, the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Peniota.
Yeah.
And thank everybody for coming. Really appreciate you being here, and please do not hesitate to ask questions. I would really love for this to be a discussion, not a presentation. So, you can help me here. The program, as Peniota mentioned, was put together for Cyprus Seeds, and it is based on a lot of what we do at MIT. So I'm going to tell you a little bit first about MIT. And at MIT, and then now I recognize this is old data, however, at MIT, we are very focused in general at the school, as are some of the schools in US, not all of them, but we are very focused on actually getting technology out into the world so it'll make an impact. So we are very focused on having the students work with industry. We do sponsored research with corporations, and if you were to take a look at what's come out of MIT, we could be the 10th largest economy. So we're proud of the work that MIT does in general, and at the Deshpande Center we're happy to be a part of that. So what does that mean? At the Deshpande Center, we are probably the only department at MIT that is not focused on education. We are focused on commercialization. We want to see social impact, we want to see economic impact, but our intent is not to fund academic impact. And, you know, academic impact has a place, but our real goal is to take the technology, get it out into the world so it does make an impact. So, what we like to think is that we are helping teams that have good technology get to the next stage of funding. And that next stage of funding, you know, can be a variety of sources, but generally we're looking at getting it out of MIT. So what do? We provide a grant program. In that grant program, we are providing both funding and mentorship. And from the team perspective, the mentorship we provide includes not just the people working on the team, and the people working on the team are generally going to be a professor who would be the principal investigator and manage the budget. That team would also include either PhD candidate or a postdoc that is most likely going to take this work out of MIT and form a company. More often than not, the route to commercialization is through a startup company at MIT rather than licensing technology, because quite frankly our MIT Technology Transfer Office is so busy managing the projects that are brought to them, they are not likely to spend a lot of time trying to license technology that isn't being promoted by a team, and most likely a team forming a startup company. So they just don't have time to look for people that might want to license the technology, they need to be really kind of pushed by a team that's trying to do this. So most often it's a startup that comes out of MIT. So what do? We actually at the Deshpande Center take the teams, put them into a room with their technology licensing officer, so whoever that professor might deal with respect to patents. And patent protection is very important to us at MIT. You know, we have, we're in the middle of the US, so US patents are really important. And that's a little bit different than what you have here in Cyprus. We're going to focus on making sure that the intellectual property is protected right from the very beginning when we support a project. We also have, and this is unique to our program at MIT, we bring in industry expertise to actually sit on the team. And by that I mean they mentor. We have a number of experts that work with us, probably 45 to 50 that work with us regularly to actually mentor the teams directly. They will work with the teams about once a month to help guide the team through their milestones. Now, what does that mean? Okay, well, at MIT we assume, and I'm sure it's the same at your universities, we assume that the technology will get figured out if it's feasible. What we want to do is make sure that as they develop the technology, they're working on how on the technology in a manner that it will meet the specifications of industry. So how does this disruptive technology fit into the industry? What needs to happen? How should they tailor the technology? What characteristics are most important to be met? And with that team, we put them through what we call market discovery. And by market discovery, I don't mean looking at marketing reports. I mean actively working with contacts in the industry where they will develop their technology. And what we do is, so we connect them with industry, and that's very important. We connect them with entrepreneurs. Many of our mentors have started companies themselves, so they can provide a lot of advice on starting company in that domain. We connect them also with the investors. Now, in Boston, we have a really thriving ecosystem. Certainly especially in the biotech industry, you know, we have lots of investors looking for companies. So we don't have to look very hard for investors to connect our startups with. And we provide a number of events where they can actually, the startups can, let me step back. The people we invest in are researchers at MIT. They're not startups yet. So we're investing at the time where, you know, they're thinking about spinning out. We have events and showcase poster sessions, presentations that will bring these research teams, give them the opportunity to actually interface with investors and people in the industry, so that when they're ready to leave MIT, they've got a network already established, and we can put them in contact with direct investors too. And so if you kind of summarize what we do at the Deshpande Center, the first thing we do is carefully select the projects. We want to be sure that they're feasible. Technically feasible within, say, 1 to 3 years of spinning out. We're going to make sure that, you know, there is some sort of impact to be made, and we don't necessarily expect the research teams to understand that impact yet. They may not be able to totally quantify the impact that they could make, but we would like them to have an idea of how it could be used in industry. And we'll help them sort through the application, make contacts, and learn more. We also look for a team that is interested in commercialization. Now, the professor is not going to leave the university. The professor is going to stay at the university, so we look for either the postdoc or the PhD grad student to be interested in actually moving out of the lab and I mean, I have to admit, it's really a disappointment if we get through a year or two of grants and the main champion for the grant says, well, you know, I think maybe I want to be a professor. You know, I mean, that's a good thing, and it's good for them. They understand their, you know, we understand their interest in their career path, but that doesn't help us get the technology out. So that's our main interest in looking at a second year of funding. If we're going to give them a renewal, our main interest is in making sure, you know, that there's somebody on that team that will take the technology out. And so we direct them on how to do that. We advise them. We also, in part of our advice at the Deshpande Center is to stay in the university as long as possible. Once you're a startup company, you have lots of expenses, lots of administrative issues. You need to set up offices and labs. You have expensive equipment to buy, and you have to pay for patents. It's really expensive. So the longer you can stay at a university and have all that taken care of for you, the better off you are. Now, the only reason that you might want to start a company earlier is if you want to generate intellectual property that will be part of the company. Because once somebody leaves MIT, they have to come back and license the technology in order to use it. But that's usually the path that people choose. They stay at the university as long as they can. And so we connect them with folks in the industry and investors. And again, the goal is to actually get the technology out of MIT to the point where it can pick up other funding. Now, most of the funding that is going to come after the university, it could be an incubator, so a startup incubator where they maybe get some funding to further their experiments, and the government has a number of those, but there are also private incubators, or it could be federal funding, small business innovative research grants, and the advantages of funding like that is it doesn't cut into the founder's equity. It could be maybe venture capital, maybe you know, they're part of competitions and they win money that could help further the company. Or it could be venture capital, but generally, unless it's a significant disruptive technology, especially in the medical industry, you know, generally it's not venture capital first thing. You know, more generally it's either seed funding, family and friends, or you know, maybe some government funding. So our contribution. So what have we done? We've got this great program, and how do we know it's great? We know it's great because our success rate is about 30%. So of all the 150 projects that have gone through the Deshpande Center in the 17 years, we've put probably about 20 million into those projects. And again, this could be over the course. Each project wouldn't have gotten more than, say, 250,000. But over the course of the 17 years, we've had 41 companies spin out now. So, you know, we're pretty proud of the results, and we attribute those results really to the mentorship that we provide, because it's focused on domain expertise, and the milestones that the teams are striving to achieve, and we kind of keep them accountable for, along with the little bit of funding that we give them. So, any questions on MIT first before I move on to what we talked about this week in the workshops?
So how do you select these, let's say, startups to participate in the program?
Yeah, we select them. We have an application process. So we start with a pre-proposal, which is about 4 pages, and we review all those pre-proposals. We'll get about, say, 35 a year. We'll review those proposals, and the committee, the selection committee, actually consists of our mentoring network. So each proposal is reviewed by at least 4 people, and it's a formal review. At least 4 people, and each of our mentors reviews at least 4 proposals. And we get together and we discuss the proposals, and in the course of an afternoon, we select who we will ask back to complete a full proposal, a proposal presentation, and then we move on to award grants. Generally, out of the 35 that may apply, we will ask 10 to 15, maybe even fewer, well, about 10 to 15 to come back with a full proposal. And generally, we don't do that if we don't think we're going to fund them. But of those 15 that come back, probably a couple will drop out. Probably maybe 5 might drop out.
Okay, what is the main focus? What is the main focus of interest for your, let's say, organization to select?
Yes. So we don't have one discipline. We would like to be sure that, and one of the criteria, I'm glad you asked that, because one of the criteria, besides the, feasibility, technical feasibility, and the team, and what do they know about the impact, the other thing we look at is, can we help them? So if we don't have mentors, well, first of all, if it's not a technology that is deep enough to need help, if it's something we think that they can go ahead and commercialize without our help, then, what's the point? And we don't mind taking risk. So we want to be sure, one, that we can help them with our pool of mentors. So do we have that domain domain expertise, or will we find the domain expertise that they'll need in order to go further? And is it something that's technical enough to need help?
So it's mostly like industry changing projects, right? So deep technically mean to have something valuable not only for commercialization but also for some impact on other spheres, right?
Yes, yeah, we're looking for social impact, economic impact, and generally it's not just making something less expensively. We're really looking for disruptive technology. Yeah, thank you for asking. Anything else on MIT before we move on? All right. So, what we talked about, and I have the agenda up here. We're not going to go through that agenda, exactly. But what we talked about was really why bother with customer discovery. What is market discovery all about? You develop good technology, and if it's going to help somebody, shouldn't that be obvious? Shouldn't it be obvious that it should be adopted? And it doesn't really work that way. So, in the workshop, we talked about why innovate, and each of us have our own reasons for wanting to innovate, but you need a good reason to spend the time it takes to actually innovate. So, if we take a look at the time it takes to innovate, what do you think? And so I'm going to use my little pointer here. This is old technology. All right? I like this better than the laser. Okay, so what's that? Oh, how did that happen?
Well, it's interactive.
Wow.
You broke it, Karen. So, old versus new.
Wow, that's cool. Okay, anyway, sorry for that. Yes, I will not touch the screen again, I promise. Okay, so, what is that question mark? How long do you think it takes to go from a lab bench idea to really making an impact? And we're not talking about, just really first use and early markets. We're talking about really being something that is used significantly, that is adopted and used. How long do you think?
5 years? 10 years?
Yes, a lot of years.
How year?
A lot of years.
A lot of years, yeah, a lot of years, yeah. How many?
5?
So we got 5. Do I hear 10? I heard 10.
Maybe.
Okay, do I hear 15? How about 20? Now, of course it's going to be different depending on the technology that you're working on. You know, some things, and especially if you're talking about apps or, you know, things that could be done fairly quickly, that don't require approvals, you know, it could be just a few years. But if you're talking about new drugs, things that have to go through clinical trials, and about half of our projects are healthcare. So in asking, which projects do we support, a lot of them are healthcare, some of them are energy, water, electronics, it's kind of across the spectrum at MIT. But many of these require approvals, regulatory approvals that do take time. So not only is it time to get those approvals and develop them, but you need to work with customers, you need to pilot. Even if you're doing a water technology, you're looking at something that you might even have to treat through different seasons to see how the lakes or waters adapt. So it takes time. And what is time? Time is money. Time is money. Time is also parts of your lives. So when we talk about innovating, and it's not an easy decision for a researcher to decide, that's not easy, to decide that I'm going to dedicate the next 10, 15 years to developing this technology. It takes time. You've got to be ready to do it. So the point that I'm getting, the point I'm making is not, you shouldn't decide to do this. I'm not trying to talk anybody out of that. But what I do encourage you to do is to do it as efficiently as possible. So how do we minimize risk, and why market discovery? So what's the first thing you need for a business?
Idea.
Okay, that's one.
Customers.
What?
Customers.
Customers, yes! And not just customers,
Paying.
paying customers, yes. Okay, so often when we have an idea that seems obvious and it's going to help people, we kind of forget that, okay, so we do need to find somebody that's going to pay for it. And what happens in healthcare, as an example, many of the benefits are going to be felt by the patient. But it's not necessarily the patient that's going to be paying for it. The person paying for it might indeed be the insurance company, or it could be the clinic that needs to have the equipment to benefit the patient. So it's really important to understand that who the customer is and who's going to benefit and who's going to actually pay. So why do most startups fail? Well, you hear the number one reason is building something nobody wants. So if you don't put a product or a technology and make it user-friendly, if you don't put it out for the customer that's actually going to pay, you're kind of stuck. Also, so lack of customers, but a lot of these others, lack of focus, that still has to do with your technology and where you're going to apply it. So at any rate, it's a big deal, and a lot of the information that I'm providing and kind of the context here, the National Science Foundation in the US found that they were putting $7 to $8 billion a year into these small business innovative research grants, and not very many of those companies were surviving. So it became an issue. They said we need to figure out market discovery so that the products are made that can actually be used in the applications. So, managing risk. When we take a look at managing risk, and I like methods. I'm pretty organized. So I look at managing risk and I say, okay, so we've got the engineering risk, that's a technical risk. At MIT, we kind of figure they're going to get that right with the right guidance from their professor. But then we also have the market risk. And if we look at how we manage the engineering risk, we've got the scientific hypothesis. We go through the scientific method in evaluating, we come up with a design, we evaluate that design, through testing, and, we kind of reiterate. We go back and forth between testing and development, and eventually we can launch our product. Well, we kind of know how to do that when it comes to the technical parts, but we don't spend a whole lot of time doing that when it comes to the market. So what we're talking about here is actually taking that market risk, which is really kind of undefined at this point, and we're going to go through the same thing. We're gonna come up with an idea on where our product will be used. We're going to develop that idea, test it with customers, and eventually we're going to launch it. But really we're talking about customer or market discovery and then validating our assumption. So we make an assumption based on where we think that impact's going to be made. We also take a look at, okay, so we're assuming a particular customer, a particular market, and we're assuming an impact. And we're going to validate that by talking to customers. We're going to talk to enough of those payers, potential payers, to understand how this technology can be used, what are the consequences of what they're doing now, and what will the benefits be. And we do this by interviewing them, and then we come back around. If our assumptions are not correct, then we kind of start over again. But the whole idea is you talk to enough customers, you develop your prototypes maybe with the customer, with their understanding. And MIT teaches, you get out there as soon as you can with your prototype, even if it's this little plastic thing that kind of simulates what you're going to create. You get out there, you test it, you find out what the customers want to see, and you go from there before you put a lot of money into developing a finished prototype. So, I guess this is my little bit of humor. Why talk to customers? What do they have to do with what we want them to buy, right? And back in many years ago when I did marketing, we really didn't talk to as many customers. Talking to a customer kind of meant they were giving us a complaint. But today we realize that it's more important. So, market needs in assessing your technology. What I'm going to do is kind of give you a worksheet that we walked through, and in this worksheet, you kind of define the needs of the market. So, for who? When we talk about who, I want to use my pointer. When we talk about who, but I promise I won't touch the screen. Okay, when we talk about who, there are lots of who's. As I mentioned, you have the patient, but then you have who's going to actually pay for it. If you are doing something for children, say it's an educational tool for children, are you going to try to sell to children? Not necessarily. You're probably going to sell to either the school or the parents. So every situation, every technology, every product is going to have a number of different people that would have an interest in what you're doing. So it's a matter of figuring out who they are and what their interest is. So, what is their interest? Well, they have a problem, and that's what you want to establish. So does anybody have any technology that you'd want to use as an example?
Breathing detector.
Pardon?
Breathing detector for kids, for babies.
Breathing detector. So, actually, we have at the Deshpande Center, we have funding to do research on Down syndrome. And sleep apnea is one of the issues. So breathing, yes. So breathing detection on infants. Who's interested in that?
Parents.
What's the problem? Why do they need to detect that?
They want to know the baby is alive during the night.
Yes. SIDS? The sudden infant
Yes,
death?
from 0 to 1.
Yes.
The syndrome,
Yes.
they want to avoid the syndrome.
The physician?
The syndrome, no, they try
Oh,
to
the syndrome, yeah, absolutely. No, that's a big deal. So the parents want a sense of confidence that the baby's breathing.
Clinics may be also interested.
Pardon?
Babies have clinics.
Clinics,
If they
yeah.
keep babies till inside,
Right?
they need to monitor automatically somehow.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So, who's gonna pay for it?
The parent?
Parents.
The parent.
The parents.
Or the kid. Or the
Yeah, the parents.
parent.
Could be the parents, could be the clinics. But what do you think is gonna be important along with the parents and the clinics? What if it's really expensive? What else, what other stakeholders gonna be important?
Insurance company.
Insurance companies, absolutely.
And doctors probably.
And doctors, right.
They would suggest,
right.
they would-
But one thing we learned with a lot of our healthcare projects is that what's really important to the doctors is there a place on the insurance form? Is there a code for this? You know, where do we put it so that we can get reimbursed? So those are the stakeholders, and the problem is, parents want this so that they can know whether or not the child's breathing, okay? So, what do they need to do? They need to know that the child's breathing. Okay, so this is the pain. This is the problem. They don't know now whether or not the child's breathing. And today their best approach is to, and I can speak as a parent who had a baby, we had the infant monitor right next to our bed, and we had it turned up as loud as it could go, so that every time we rolled over slightly awake, we could hear that our child was breathing. That was our only answer. And so not only you're a new parent, you're not getting sleep because the baby wakes up, you're also, you know, only half asleep because you're worried about listening for the breathing. So, the part of the need and understanding the pain is understanding what's really wrong and what you're trying to fix. So, because of this limitation, so parents don't get sleep, kids die, right? I mean, that's a big deal. And it costs, you know, what does it cost when a child dies? You know, what is the impact, you know, what, is there insurance impact? You know, there have gotta be economic costs here too.
Yeah, some clinics can be sued because.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So
But
part.
can be health insurance if the parents have.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, part of this is really, you know, understanding, not just, well, wouldn't everybody wanna know that their child's alive? It's really being able to quantify, what does that really mean right now? What is the limitation? And what is that costing? You know, how big is this problem? So, resulting in the consequences. And it may seem unfeeling or too commercial to try to put this into economic terms, but sometimes that's what's needed in order to
Yes,
really.
because if you quantify this, then you can persuade the insurance companies
Exactly.
and the clinic
Exactly.
that you're gonna save this
Right.
amount of money.
Right.
Okay, apart from
Exactly, yeah. If you can quantify it, it's so much easier to convince somebody that this is important and it should be something that's covered under insurance. So, that's the pain. And that's defining the need. So for each of your technologies, you should be able to sit down and really define this and understand this as best you can. How do you find this out? You talk to potential customers. You talk to people in the ecosystem, so not necessarily just somebody that's gonna buy it, but somebody else that would have an interest like the insurance company. In clinics would be obvious too. Okay, so that's the pain. So, now we get into, okay, what is the gain? The gain is, what does this call for? What is the need then? The need is for the monitor, right? Okay, the need is for the monitor, and what critical attributes need to be part of that? If it's a monitor, and it's listening to whether or not the baby's sleeping, it's gonna have to have an alarm, right?
alarm that should be specifically just for breathing,
Yes,
not detecting other noise.
exactly. Okay,
No
so
speculation.
exactly. It's, you know, somehow you need to be able to distinguish between other movements, you know, you need to get specific enough that what you're going to alarm the parents about is that the baby stop breathing. Yeah, exactly. This is a good example. Thank you for bringing it. Okay, and if we can do that, we will have what? If you can provide that solution, how do they benefit? What does the who benefit? The parents know right away, right?
The baby,
About the baby?
Yeah, they know right away about the baby, and they can,
they can save the baby.
yeah, they can
Well,
save the baby. They can kind of shake it up and, well, I shouldn't say that. Shake it up, shake babies. That's not a good thing. You know, but they can certainly arrest the pattern, and the baby will be fine. And what are the other so what are the other benefits? So the baby lives. What else?
So clinics and insurance don't pay? for
Yeah.
the-
Yeah, clinics are in the clear. They have not only, think about the competitive angle. If this clinic has the monitor, wouldn't you feel better about having your baby in that clinic?
Exactly.
Yeah. Also, the parents sleep.
Exactly.
Yeah, they've got peace of mind. Okay, great. So, that's the product or service, your monitor. That's the gain, the benefit. Whoops, let's go back here. Okay, if you can quantify those benefits, and again, just as we quantify the consequences, you want to quantify the benefits. Okay, so what we're going to do next is talk about assumptions. So, the first thing, we go back here, what assumptions are you making each step along the way? So, you have assumed that parents are concerned and that they don't know if the baby stops breathing. You have assumed that there is a certain number of sudden infant deaths occurring. So we've got this syndrome. There are numbers associated with that. You want to clarify with the right people. You want to really validate that assumption and understand, you know, how much money is this costing insurance companies or clinics, you know, really kind of define what does this really mean. So in every assumption you make, you really want to check it out. And I don't mean just with one person or one clinic. You want to get a variety of information. And what that does is that helps you establish your case. So, who do you need to talk to validate those assumptions? Who do you need to talk to understand how big that problem is? Is it a shark bite? Or is it a mosquito bite? You know, I know that sounds silly, but really you want to understand how big this problem is. And who do you need to talk to do this? So, if you were to take that needs statement that we just went through, and if somebody was to ask you, so what are you doing? What are you trying to do? And you were in an elevator. And Panis, I thank Panis for sending me the link on the elevator pitch. I forget what it was called.
It's in entrepreneur.com, the website.
Yeah.
And there is a show, the last 5 seasons there. It's called Elevator Pitch.
Elevator pitch.
Yeah, and there, okay, you can see startups pitching an elevator.
So,
in 60 seconds.
yes.
Yeah.
So they have 60 seconds. I mean, this is kind of like Shark Tank.
Yeah.
But they have 60 seconds. They're going in the elevator for those 60 seconds. And that's the time they have to describe their technology, what they're working on, and why. So, as researchers, it's so easy for us to put together giant paragraphs, lots of words on the technology, how important it is, and, you know, by the time you finish, they've gotten off the elevator and they have no idea what you're doing. So the important thing, we call it elevator pitch because it needs to be short,
and you want to catch somebody's attention. And I've heard people say you really want to kind of grab them in the heart, because if they can resonate with what it is you're doing, one, they're more interested, and if they're an investor and they're interested, they're more likely to fund you. So, in your elevator pitch, you want to take that needs statement, why you're doing this, who you're doing it for, and what the benefit is, and you put it into what we call the value proposition. And if if you've had any experience with the business model canvas and some of the other tools for entrepreneurs, this all fits in. But basically, you want to say, okay, our breathing monitor for babies is a monitor that would provide.
It's a life safety coach.
Yes, a life safety coach. It will provide reassurance to parents and clinics that their baby's okay, or alert them if there's a problem. And it's going to do that. So it will alert them immediately that there is a problem and the babies could be rescued within seconds. So this is for parents in clinics who want that reassurance and want to minimize any risk related to sudden infant death, unlike what they're currently doing, which is just taking chances. I'm paraphrasing, but and you don't necessarily need to use that unlike the current option or the main competitor. But what you want to impress upon somebody is what you're doing, why you're doing it, what the problem is, that there's a problem. You want them to know that there's a problem, and what the impact would be if your monitor was used. Make sense? Yeah. So, the needs statement and the value proposition kind of go hand in hand. So, we're going to kind of shift now, and I don't have too many more slides, so not to worry. But we're going to shift to actually talking about, so how do you get this information? How do you either validate the assumptions you're making, understand how big the need is, understand how big the benefit would be? You talk to customers. And so we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing. First, to say that when you interview, you're going to learn things. You're going to hear answers to questions you didn't ask. So interviewing is really important, and it's not about pitching. When you interview, at least through this method, we advise that you listen. You present yourself as, I'm a university student, I'm in development, I'm researching. You want to be, humble and not a salesman. You want to be able to, you want to endear them. You want to be sincere in your interest in how things are done now, because you want to discover how things are done, really, and what their problems are. So it's all about learning. And you should actually be talking about 30% of the time. They should be talking 70% of the time. So you want to uncover as much as you can about what's happening right now. So, how do you start? First, you need to do it yourself. This is not something you can farm out. In MIT, we have lots of researchers that say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the people in the marketing school. I'm going to go over to Sloan, and I'm going to bring in a couple of them to actually do the market research for us. They've got access to all sorts of databases and information. That doesn't work. What you want to hear is firsthand what's actually happening. So you want to internalize as much as you can. If you're in a university, use that calling card. You're not a threat. You're not a company trying to sell them a product. If you are a company, then, try to be humble and just learn. in asking for the interview, explain to them what you want to do. I'm working on this technology, and don't describe the technology, just say I'm working on, something related to babies sleeping, and I'm concerned about, SIDS, and can you give me, say, 20 minutes to talk? I want to understand more about what's done and what the problems are today. If you ask for 20 minutes, generally they're going to give you 30. It's okay at the end of the 20 minutes to say, oh, do you have a few minutes more? I have a couple more questions. But, generally, people really like to talk about their jobs and their problems. So you shouldn't have a lot of trouble finding somebody, getting them to talk to you once you've been able to at least either get an introduction or you've got a little bit of communication going. If you can do it face to face, it's a lot better. And the reason for that is that you see the body language. If you're not face to face, if you're over the phone, it's really hard to know whether or not you've got their attention. The chances are, they're playing Spider Solitaire, they're checking their emails. I mean, it just is hard to know whether or not you've got their attention. So do it face to face if you can. If you can't do it face to face, and I know certainly you're going to be talking to a lot of people that are international, do it over Skype. And you want to see if they roll their eyes. You want to see if they, kind of sit back and they're not so interested. You really want to pick up on those clues. Plan your questions, but don't be a slave to those questions. Make sure that you're flexible enough. If you get them talking about something and you're discovering a different need that you hadn't anticipated, or maybe a benefit that you might provide with your technology, then keep them talking. Ask why. Continue to ask why. If you don't understand what they're talking about, just don't just, oh yeah, okay, and let them continue. But make sure that you understand. And I also advise having somebody else with you on the visit. If you can do an interview and be focused on talking with the person across the room, rather than taking notes at the same time, then you're much better off. So if you have somebody with you to actually take the notes down, what I find is that two people hear things a little bit differently too. So you might actually pick up a little bit more. So, what information do you need and what are you going to be asking? Well, what is the need or problem and who really cares about it? In the situation, you may not be talking to the right person. They can probably introduce you to the right person though. So be sure to consider that as you're talking. And if you're doing this face to face and you're in, say, a company building or something like that, or you're in a clinic, you can probably talk to a number of people in that same building and get probably different information. It should be all consistent, but different pieces. So again, you want to know how big that problem is and what are the consequences. And when I say what does the solution need to look like, I mean how does that how does the monitor need to fit into the process? So I'll use an example here, and I think monitors are kind of good to work with. In one of our projects, they were working on dairy contamination, so milk contamination. Milk contamination in India, and what happens is, as milk goes from the farmer to the processing plant and eventually is packaged for customers, the milk is diluted along the way because it's sold by weight. So there is a lot of corruption in the supply chain. So this team developed a monitor where you could actually, almost like something you'd look at for refractive index or specific gravity, this little cup that you'd actually put the milk in, and it would give you the solids concentration. So you could track that, and it also, you know, it would capture the data electronically, and you could track the milk as it traveled down the supply chain. Well, they thought that most important would be something that could be handheld. You know, because, you know, you could go around to the different vats or whatever and actually take the measurements. Well, what they really wanted, once they went out and they talked to the farmers and the different pieces of the value chain, what they really wanted to see was something that was stationary, not portable, because if it's portable, it's going to walk away. So, you know, that's something that you might not think about, and you're only going to learn. And if they had put a lot of money into developing this instrument without talking to the customers first, you know, they'd be out a lot of money and time. So the other thing that you want to really hone in on is what is unique about your solution, and you want to be sure that there isn't somebody else doing this. So, you know, you might ask, okay, so do you know anybody else, you know, do you know anybody working on this? How do you solve this problem right now? You know, how do you work around the issue? And are there people working on it? Are there people looking at other technologies to help you do something like this? So, some of the questions that we like to ask include, who besides Professor Antonio, Niu. Okay, I'm sorry.
I sound like a Japanese person.
Antonio. I know. See, I'm used to dealing with actually Italians. So,
It's Antonio with a U.
okay, Antonio. You. Okay, I'm sorry.
Maria.
Okay, Maria. So, Dr. Maria, Professor Maria, who besides yourself will be making this decision? Okay, this is a really important question because you want to know if you're talking to the right person. If you are looking for the contact that might be involved in purchasing and you're not sure that you've got the right person, or there could be a committee in a clinic. There could be lots of people involved. A clinic, if it's, you know, more of a public clinic, there could be a whole administrative body that's going to be involved in making this decision. By phrasing it this way, you're giving the person you're talking to credit that they're part of the decision-making team. So you're not insulting them, but you are finding out, is there somebody else I should be talking to here? Another question that could go along with this too is, when do you make the decision? How do you make the decision? Is this something that needs to go into a budget a year ahead? You know, if it's something that you're dealing with, you know, public administration, it could take 5 years to get something in a budget. So you want to know that and be able to plan for it. So, who else would you recommend I talk to, and would you make an introduction? If you can get somebody to introduce you, it's a whole lot easier to talk to that person. What other questions? See, you missed something the second day, Maria.
I had 2 classes, it was impossible to come.
What other questions should I have asked you? Maybe that sounds like a dumb question to ask, but depending on who you're talking to, they might not be that forthright. They might think, oh gee, you totally missed this one area. And so if you ask that, you know, you're gonna get maybe more information. Maybe there's nothing, but it's good to ask that, and it shows, you know, some of these questions show that you're, you want to learn. I'm trying to say it's okay, you don't need to be self-deprecating, I don't mean that necessarily, but you can bumble a little bit. You know, you don't want to intimidate the other person, so you don't need to be too formal. You don't need to have your list and you know, be really firm about the questions. You want to be relaxed, and that makes them more comfortable. As we have other questions, how can I best contact you? So, rather than saying, oh, you know, if I have other questions, can I call you? You give them the option to say no if you do that. So really, by saying, you know, how is it best to contact you? Would you prefer I email you? Or would you prefer a phone call? Or would you prefer I send you an email to set up a phone call? You know, what's your preference? You want to keep the door open. And you want to be able, I mean, you might say, okay, as I digest, oh, you've told me so much. You know, as I digest what you've told me, you know, I'd like to come back and ask you some more questions. You know, how would that work best for you? You know, just be casual about it, but keep the door open. And so where you want to end up at the end of your interviews is, we know our technology will fit. And so you want a sense of confidence that you've learned as much as you can, at least from that person you're talking to in that interview. And if you talk to enough people, now the National Science Foundation, when they put together their program, their expectations are that you will get out and interview at least 100 people. And that may seem like a lot, but you want to hear a consistent story by the time you're done with it. Not everybody's going to either tell you the truth or tell you something relevant. But you need to be able to talk to enough people to sift through and figure out what is important. That's it. So, what questions do you have? No, in the workshop we practiced interviewing, but I promise I won't put you through that. So where is a good place to find contacts? Let me ask that. If you have questions to answer related to the industry that you're working on, where do you go? Where do you go? LinkedIn? Right? Do you look on LinkedIn?
Maybe.
Yeah. Do you look at, I mean, are there associations associated with the technologies that you work on? Probably? Yeah. How about conferences? Conferences and trade shows are really good places. And so, you gotta be, a lot of technical people don't like going to conferences because they have to talk to people they don't know. And mingling doesn't necessarily come easily for people. And you have to be in the mood for it. I mean, if I'm not in the mood for mingling and talking to people, you know, a conference is a bad place to be. I know that. But you get in the mood and you become a spy. And what I like to do is, you're one person, you're walking around, you're not selling a product yet, you have technology, you want to learn about what's going on in the industry, you have potential competitors all around you. So you just kind of go and hang out at their booth, you know, not too far away, and you listen to the questions that customers may be asking them. You listen to them talk a little bit. You know, you do some detective work. Find out what's happening. You can go up and talk to the potential competitor. Find out, oh, how's business, and you know, what's most important about the qualities of your instrument. You know, what is it that's important to your customers? You can learn an awful lot, even by talking to your competitors, talking to potential customers. What do they look for? You can find a lot of people at a conference or a trade show to interview, and to listen to conversations.
What we actually tried also, if we continue the topic about spy, that there are some technologies that are quite difficult, you know, to find information about.
Yes.
It's quite new, just recent innovation.
Yeah.
What is useful is to have some at least open information about founders, right?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Founders are very important because you can find their Twitter, Instagram, and try to follow just step by step to feel how the person thinking, what he's eating, how he will spend his day. Maybe he can reveal the places he's visiting. Maybe he can reveal the people he's meeting. You start thinking like him.
So this is really good. And so two examples with some of the teams that I worked with. one of the teams actually walked around the parking lot of the company and interviewed people in the parking lot and got, or stopped people on their way in and got interviews. He was able to schedule interviews in the parking lot. Another guy sat in the Starbucks next to the company that he was especially interested in, had already looked through LinkedIn profiles, and he recognized somebody in line. And he jumped up, got in line, and ended up with an appointment for an interview. I mean, you can be creative. It does take time, but, you know, if it saves you time on that 20-year lifespan, you know, why not? Yeah. And it can be fun. You know, I think maybe that's the important thing too. I didn't really say that in our workshop, but you know, the whole process can be hard and tedious and long, but it can also be fun. Sure, Pennies.
Yeah, just to share a tip about LinkedIn and this spying stuff, because something that I use a lot. When you want to approach a person that you don't have a connection, if you go to LinkedIn, to his profile, it shows you below if you have a connection with him.
Yeah.
So you find that person that has the connection with the guy that you want to reach out, and you ask from that guy to invite you to make you an intro to the person that you actually want to. And this is how I'm trying to bring the biggest venture capitalist inside.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's
you get an introduction through somebody you know.
Yeah, introductions are very, very, especially if you are raising money. It's very important who is going to introduce you to an investor.
And very actually, similar to that, if there's an association and they've had conferences, and you can go into the history and take a look at who's presented at those conferences. Sometimes you can even see the material they presented. If you contact that person that presented and say, oh, I read your report, I saw your presentation, I've got some questions, would you talk to me? Do you think they're going to say no? Probably not. Yeah, they would be happy to talk with you. So, you know, do as much research as you can on who would be interested in the same topic you are, and find the contacts that way. Anything? Yes.
I have a question about the risk related to market. How do you mitigate the risk? Can you give us some other strategic maybe mitigation examples that somebody has to take into consideration?
The risk to the market. So risk in terms of which, I mean, there are probably lots of different risks for market risk. The risk of the right customer, or the risk of like the type, I'm not sure.
For example, if you are a cypress and you want to export your product.
Right, yeah.
What kind of risk do I take into consideration?
Okay. So you want to export your product, so you want to know who's most likely to buy it, where are you going to export it, find out, I mean, there are lots of cost risks that you might have to incur that you don't necessarily know about up front. So you have to kind of do research on, okay, what is it going to take me to get me to the dock to actually export the product? But who's most likely to buy it? What kind of risk is there in bringing it into, say, their country? And how are they doing it now? So one thing, as you talk about risks like this, or risks of understanding how, say, a foreign company might buy, that type of risk, if you can find out other people that have done it, or if you're looking at partnering with a company, find out what experience other companies have had partnering with that company. So if you're looking to do work with somebody, even though you've got something to sell, you still need to be interviewing them to be sure that's somebody you want to work with. Whether it's work with them as a partner, even use them as a supplier, you want to know what kind of experiences other people have. If you're talking to somebody that's acquired companies and you think they might want to acquire yours down the road, or if that's part of your exit strategy, you want to know, okay, how has that gone for other companies they've acquired? And I've done that. I've actually, through LinkedIn, found somebody that actually sold a business to this company we were talking to about partnering with. And I wanted to hear his horror stories. I wanted to know what to expect, what to watch out for. And he gave us an earful, but as it turned out, he was kind of an arrogant guy to begin with, and I thought, well, if I was that company, I don't know that I'd want to work with him very much anyway. But you can learn a lot we call it due diligence, just kind of learning more about the interactions that other people have had. And you could, by the same token, you can learn about people that have introduced something similar to what you've done, or what you're doing, and find out, well, how long did it take you to get FDA approval, or how long did it take you, to get the market to, understand your need, or whatever it is. You can find out from people that already introduced something similar, the different channels, and they may be able to make contacts, or they may be able to tell you where you can have prototypes made. Anything else? Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm sure you could have found something else to do with your evening, and I appreciate your attention. Thanks. And thank you to Cypress Seats.
Oh, thank you.
And the U.S. Embassy.
And the U.S. Embassy that supported.
And Cutting Edge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Supported the trip to Cyprus for Mrs. Goldman, and of course the Cutting Edge.
Yes,
so thank you again.
thank
If
you.
you want to learn more about Cypress Seeds or more info from Mrs. Karen, we can give a couple of minutes extra for you, and we can meet each other as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over and out.
So just off topic question maybe.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing statistics that a lot of startups succeeded like based on MIT technology, and most of, let's say, shareholders and innovators are coming from MIT.
Right.
Just like a question, what do you think make these places so different among other universities? Because I'm sure you did a lot of like lectures and presentation in many universities around the world, and you have maybe like your own opinion. Because of course, I understand this is of course big like American market. There's big money and probably motivation of people.